Hello, Publius.
GM, sir, how are you?
All is well here. How's everything with you?
Doing great. Very excited.
Well, it's a big day at the farm. We have big news.
Yeah, it was pretty cool news today. There's real things being built on top of Beanstalk. How exciting is that?
And just the beginning. I actually wanted to dedicate maybe some time of this class, or as much time as it needs, to go over Root. I see Mr. Manifold is here. Mr. Manifold, do you want to come up and maybe we can like fire some questions about Root? Let's do that. Hi, Mr. Manifold.
Hey, Mod, how are you, brother?
All is well. How's everything with you?
Good. Busy day, clearly. But looks like we're everyone's firing on all cylinders. So good stuff.
Definitely. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you and the Root team again on the successful seed round. Very exciting, for Beanstalk, and we wish you all the success. Your success is our success, of course.
Thanks, Mod. I appreciate that. Yeah. We're all in this together, team effort, and we're excited to build. I genuinely think that there is so many cool new applications and markets you can build on top of Beanstalk, and it's really going to fuck some shit up in DeFi. So, yeah, let's get after it.
Definitely. Before we start, to the audience, as always, if anyone has any question, feel free to drop them on the town hall chat. Otherwise, I'll start with a few. Manifold, can you briefly tell us what is Root?
Sure thing. So Root is a generalized marketplace protocol that we want to be able to support arbitrary Oracle settled markets, BDD based derivative markets, NFT represented goods and service or asset markets. And we really just want to build and offer markets that are in demand. And so, while it's generalizable and we're building in such a way, we can roll out, different types of markets. We really just primarily want to do things that there's real demand for. So, obviously, we're thinking about this fertilizer market to help unlock liquidity in the fertilizer market post replant, which I think is very important. And then, Root kind of started as this out of this like intellectual exercise on like, okay, well, what are the different ways you can kind of generate and create fixed yields on top of Beanstalk? And so, having some type of interest rate swap market is also kind of something we're actively designing and thinking about right now too.
Okay, great. And Root is a zero fee marketplace. Can you tell us how does Root make money if there are no fees charged to its users?
Yeah, so we aren't going to be charging any maker or taker fees. We want to make it like designed as this rent-free public good utility for Beanstalk and Beanstalk users, such that there's and sure there's like minimal like friction, minimal cost to farmers, and do it in a way that encourages maximal utilization. And so I guess Root makes money like kind of every other farmer makes money, which is through Beanstalk seniorage, and it's important for us to grow demand and use cases on top of Beans aside from just liquidity provision, and things that are more circular within Beanstalk's native system, because ultimately that's healthy, and for Beans to really gain traction, it needs to be a diverse group of utilities that farmers can use. But then also, we plan to help provide liquidity to and make markets. And so, that's kind of the other lever here, where, Root, not Root the protocol, but Root the entity, may be participating in Beanstalk, helping provide liquidity, make markets for users, and create, things like the silo yield curve, or else I'll at least be a player in that creation.
Okay, one of the markets that Root would facilitate is like a prediction market or a betting market. When it comes to events and not things that are either yes or no, if this thing happened or not, what price article would Root use to get this answer?
Totally. So short term, there's Chainlink, there's Teller, there's a handful of others that Root could I think fairly seamlessly integrate with. However, each of those might have their own sets of trade-offs, and for Beanstalk and or Root, it might not be the perfect Oracle solution, but it could be a functional one. But I do think over time, in the long term, we are collectively going to want to develop, a Beanstalk native Oracle, which, can be used in, in regards to kind of any protocol building on top of Beanstalk. And, something that, includes maybe grown stock, staking, or an incentive system that, utilizes Bean native assets versus external third-party, assets for payment. So, eventually it just becomes another revenue source for farmers.
Okay. And I see Publius asked a question. What does success look like for Root?
Oh, man, that's a hard question and a personal question, I think. So, I think for me personally, what success looks like is, I think it's also a question of timing. So what does success look like in the next 12 months? Let's just think about predictions markets. Well, I see no reason why, Root and Beanstalk collectively can't be doing, the most prediction market volume on chain. And so, that's one personal goal of mine. If you kind of look at the landscape and you look at Polymarket, you look at Augur, there's just, certain liquidity constraints that are preventing volume. And, I think that, prediction markets for one are just this use case that, clearly makes sense on Beanstalk. And so, it's in our hands, and we're in the kind of the driver's seat to make it work. So, kind of doing the most volume for certain predictions markets would and it's hard to talk past, in crypto moves so fast. So for me in particular, it's hard to talk, in longer term timeframes, but at least in the next year or so, would like to be doing, the highest volume on chain on any blockchain for some of these markets we support.
Austin asks, is there going to be a Root token? And if yes, what's the distribution of it going to look like? And what would this token be used for? Just governance, or would it have a use?
So, yeah. So, tokenomics, all of DAO, like a lot of this stuff, just going to be straightforward. Is still very unclear, very much so unclear. We've been, pretty much 100% the last 2 months, mostly focused on capital raising, and preparing Beanstalk to get to this point. So those are things that we're going to be putting a lot more thought into the coming months. We obviously do want to, have a vibrant community and diverse group of, aligned participants within Root. It's just, a matter of, getting the time to start working on it. And then, obviously, guidance from legal and, just doing things correctly from a regulatory perspective. So, a lot of things there to unpack. But, Austin, definitely want there to be some shared, let's say, ownership at some point for Root.
Okay, wanted to touch on the NFT marketplace that you've mentioned in the announcement, and compare it a little bit to OpenSea. My understanding is that OpenSea does not facilitate financial NFTs. Do you see this as an edge for an NFT marketplace built on Root? That one, it will facilitate financial NFTs, and then number two, it's also permissionless.
Yeah, you know what? Publius actually just told me about this. I was unaware that OpenSea didn't support financial NFTs. But with that now being known, obviously I think that's a major competitive advantage. I think JPEG NFTs are just a very, very, very small subset of what the use case for NFTs is going to be going forward. And so, if OpenSea is limiting themselves on that front, I think that's just one of many different advantages that, having a decentralized marketplace with a decentralized order book could achieve. So absolutely. And then, of course, also this notion that all fees are, in crypto, really for most things tend to zero. So we're just kind of getting right to the chase, and we're pricing zero maker, zero taker fees.
All right. I'll move my question now, I guess, to Publius. Publius, what would, having markets built on top of Beanstalk, what does that mean to Beanstalk and, to the Bean economy in general?
Well, there's a lot of different things. And one of the things that, at least to me, is so exciting is that Root seems to be being built in a more generalized fashion. And if people recall, the original discussion around Root was as some sort of interest rate swap, or that was what the chatter had been. And what that looks like is that's one of the markets that can be formed on Beanstalk. And when we want to create a more efficient base layer of beans and bean price stability, having a more efficient market for beans, that in and of itself is pretty cool. So the fact that Root will be able to facilitate interest rate swaps in the silo such that over time some sort of interest rate or yield curve on the silo can be formed, just like the yield curve in the pod market is sort of a pod yield curve. The silo is a place that currently is pretty inefficient, and there's nowhere for the market to price. I think one thing that stands out as very interesting is an interest rate swap market that would facilitate over time a much more efficient base bean layer. But on top of that, Root presents real utility, or the prospect of real utility for beans. Everyone has beans or LP tokens or some combination thereof, a value, bean denominated value in the silo. And other than maintaining the peg and maximizing your bean seigniorage, thus far there isn't that much to do. And when you think about real economic activity happening on top of beans, it does make sense for that to happen on top of the silo. And the concept that Root will facilitate silo members who are holding deposited assets, collecting bean seigniorage, to now go out and do additional things on top of that and make bets on NFL Sunday, for example, which, as many of you know, has been something that has always been top of mind for us when thinking about why we started Beanstalk. It's like, well, you can't really use prediction markets on chain. Why? Because it's too expensive. There's too much opportunity cost associated with making these prediction markets. But there's no opportunity cost associated with making a prediction market, if you have a silo position. So it's just a very exciting, lots of different things that not just prediction markets, not just Beanstalk markets. Now you have the concept of NFTs. I'm not too familiar with where that's going, to be honest. I haven't thought about the NFT layer of Root much, but it seems like there's a lot of different places this is going to go, and it's pretty cool. And also just exciting that Beanstalk has another protocol being built on top of it with beans as the base money of that protocol. That in and of itself is very cool.
That's exciting times, and more excitement to come in the future. Thank you, Manifold, for the Root bit. And if others have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the town hall chat. Let's move now to Beanstalk and the Replant. Publius, can you maybe summarize what are the steps that are happening in the next few days from the BIP to humidity going down to the water treatment process, and finally the replanting and unposing of Beanstalk?
Yeah, I can walk through that. So, as everyone knows, we shared the BIP 21 draft with everyone yesterday, which included the pull request with the code changes, a draft of the white paper, and a draft of BIP 21. We're looking and fielding conversation, questions, and debate over the next few days, and we look to formally propose that on Snapshot on Friday, around noon, pending, the success of all future testing. When that's proposed, the idea is that, it will be proposed and last for 7 days. And, upon passing of BIP 21, which either looks like greater than majority of stock votes in favor after 7 days, or a supermajority in less than 7 days. When that's passed, the Publius wallet will execute a series of transactions that perform the water treatment plan, also known as the migration of the Beanstalk state to the new system. This does a variety of things. First off, it deletes all pre-exploit non-deposited beans. This means deleting harvestable beans. This means deleting orders and deleting withdrawals. So the reason we're doing this is because all of these beans can kind of be considered as circular beans. And in this process, we want to optimize around, first off, consistency, that every bean pre-exploit maps as closely to its post-exploit counterpart, but also simplicity and the fact that remapping old withdrawals to be unripe bean withdrawals is more complicated than just deleting them and reissuing them through the Merkle tree as we're doing. So following that, we'll be migrating all deposits. And this also is a couple things. It's, basically removing all old deposits and redepositing them as unripe beans in LP. The code is actually just going to do a remapping of mapping the old storage locations to the unripe deposits, but we're going to be emitting a series of events for kind of consistency across the contract. So every deposit that exists remapped has a corresponding event saying your account deposited this much of this token in this season. Once we've migrated all the deposits, we'll apply the prune to everyone and kind of recalculate and redenominate everyone's stock and seeds in accordance with the prune. And then we'll go ahead and deploy the new bean token, the new unripe bean token, the new unripe bean 3 curve token, and the new bean 3 curve meta pool. We'll add a little bit of initial liquidity to that. We'll de-whitelist the old tokens and whitelist all 4 new tokens from the silo. And that will kind of culminate in the end of the water treatment. With Publius transferring ownership of Beanstalk to the BCM, the Beanstalk Community Multisig, and transferring ownership of the fertilizer contract to Beanstalk itself. At this point, immediately following, and again, this is all happening kind of synchronously upon the passing of BIP 21. It's a lot of transactions, so it's hard to say kind of how long it will actually take to execute, but you can kind of imagine that it'll synchronously be executed until it's completed. So once the water treatment plan is over, immediately we're going to replant Beanstalk. And what this means is deploying the new facet contracts and the initialize script for the replanted Beanstalk. So Publius, after transferring ownership to the BCM, will then propose to upgrade Beanstalk to the BCM. The BCM will then, upon reviewing BIP 21, ensuring that it matches the expected BIP in accordance with the proposal and the on-chain or the source code on GitHub, will then execute the upgrade and add all of the USDC stored in the multisig as liquidity. So it will, essentially transfer that USDC to Beanstalk. Beanstalk will mint a bunch of beans at, a ratio of about 0.88, which was derived from the pre-exploit BDV. And then it will take all that USDC and all those beans and add it as the initial liquidity in the Bean 3 curve pool. So at this point, we've upgraded Beanstalk. All functionality is active except for the sunrise call, as Beanstalk is still paused. And we've deployed the new tokens, including the new Bean token, the new Bean 3 curve meta pool, and added initial liquidity, which is going to be equal to in dollar value, a bit less than double the USDC that's added. So at this point, we're going to wait until August 6th around noon, and at that point, if everything is still working correctly and as expected, the BCM will proceed with unpausing Beanstalk. The reason we want a little bit of time there is we want farmers who have unripe beans and unripe Bean 3 curve to have time to pick and deposit their pickable unripe assets before the season calls start and silo rewards start getting distributed. And essentially, we don't want to incur any sort of opportunity cost to them for kind of not knowing, not being able to pick and deposit in time if we immediately proceed with unpausing Beanstalk. When Beanstalk is unpaused, the next season will be available for being called between 1 to 2 hours upon unpausing. So if that's 6:37 p.m., the first sunrise will be available at 8 p.m. I mean, in this case, it'll be around noon. So you can expect the first season call to be at around 2 p.m. Eastern. Once Beanstalk is unpaused, just to kind of touch on the minting schedule, the first season that is called from 674 to 675 will mint 0 beans. This is because in order to take the TWAP delta B over the course of a season, we need to first initialize that. And that initialization happens on the first season call unpause. Then in the second season, when we move to 676, that will mint 1% of the delta B, and it will continue up to 100. So hopefully, that was all clear and coherent and provides a good picture to everyone of, what's expected, what we expect to happen, bearing any further, hiccups or unexpected roadblocks.
That's quite detailed. Thank you for taking us through it. Might be worth mentioning that there's going to be a new user interface for the protocol. We intend on using this week's DAO meeting to maybe give a bit of a demo so users or farmers can familiarize themselves a little bit with what the new user interface will look like. And correct me if I'm wrong, Publius, the only action that's needed from now until unpause is to pick your unripe beans, correct? If you want to pick them.
This is correct. In the pruning process, grown stock will be recalculated. All existing silo deposits will be migrated over to the unripe equivalent. Plots are still existing. Fertilizer is still there. So the only thing you'll need to do is pick and deposit, or just leave them as pickable. You don't have to pick and deposit. You can chop them, but the penalty is initially going to be 100%. So that's likely not a good idea. But that is correct, Mod.
Okay, that's great. Once again, if anyone has any question, if anything is not clear, feel free to drop it in the town hall chat. Okay, Jams asks a question. If you don't pick and deposit your unripe beans, will you still receive yield from the silo?
You will not. And this kind of goes with the general thought of, we want consistency, kind of pre and post exploit. If your, assets were not deposited, pre-exploit, they should not then automatically be deposited. So kind of, you will have to manually pick them and deposit them into the silo. When they're distributed, they're kind of in the form of a claimable, asset to where you just have to, it's stored in Beanstalk. There's kind of a Merkle tree, which is, a hash of, everyone's balances, such that we can basically store a bunch of IOUs in one kind of on-chain hash. So, you'll be able to just claim your pickable assets and immediately deposit them. But if you do not do that, you will not get yield.
Okay. And Publius, my understanding is there are going to be some new features, some of them that were already been discussed and planned before the exploit, but users or farmers will have the first opportunity or time to use it post unpause. And one of them is the concept of the farm. Can you maybe summarize that to us? Tell us, what is the farm and how will that be used?
Yeah, totally. So the farm function, real simply, is a function
that allows people to call more. So what this means is, it's basically a function that takes an array of other function calls, and these function calls can be any function that exists within the Beanstalk diamond. So previously, we had, let's take the case of sow. So previously, we had the ability to sow from ETH or sow from beans. There were two separate functions in the code. One was called sow, which sowed directly from beans, and there was a separate function called buy and sow, which allows you to buy on Uniswap only through Ethereum and deposit. we soon ran into we soon ran into like a scalability problem where obviously as we added more pools and more functionality, it became a mess to add kind of composability across all the different types of swaps. And, we had the claim version. We actually had 4 base SO functions. There was the SO, the buy and SO, the claim and SO, and the claim buy and SO. And kind of based on what you input into the UI would pick which function to call. So you can imagine we already have 4 iterations of the SO function. If we tried to add kind of a swap on curve, we would have even more iterations. And eventually, it would just exponentially grow. So we basically wanted to, we came together and thought, how can we break this apart? How can we break this into, separate but, modular composable blocks such that we can just, execute them, some arbitrary function calls sequentially. And this is kind of where we landed on the farm function. So now in Beanstalk, when you do a buy and sow beans, instead of having a specific buy and sow function, you call the farm function. And within the farm function, you call the swap on curve function and then the sow function. So basically within Beanstalk, we're implementing, the curve pipeline. And the curve pipeline is basically a wrapper interface within Beanstalk to curve, which allows you to do various functionality in any curve pool through a Beanstalk function. Now, this includes exchanging for the underlying assets in a meta pool, adding liquidity, removing liquidity. So through Beanstalk, you can now natively transact, pretty much in any curve pool, which means within the farm function, we can use that curve functionality within the same transaction as, a Beanstalk action, say, and be able to build them together to allow people to kind of take any arbitrary input, and assuming we have, a path to get from one asset to the other, you can do that. So, one feature we're really excited about is the ability to add deposited Bean3 curve directly from ETH. Now, this is actually a very complicated transaction through curve routing. And, kind of with the farm, we're able to build this together. And what that actually looks like is it first calls in Beanstalk, there's a wrap ETH function, which takes ETH and it wraps it. And then we take that wrapped ETH and we trade it in the TriCrypto pool for USDT. And then we take that USDT and we add it as liquidity in the 3 curve pool. And then we take that liquidity and add it as liquidity in the Bean3 curve meta pool. And then we take that Bean3 curve LP token and deposit it in the silo. Now that's like a lot of specific steps when we're dealing at like a individual action level. Instead now, we can just call the farm function and call this list of actions and kind of have them all execute sequentially in one transaction and allow you to kind of move more freely and with a much better user experience between all the different states that assets can be in across Beanstalk. So with this, you don't have to approve the contract for each individual token. You don't have to call multiple functions. It's just one transaction and it's done. And kind of corollary to the farm, we have the ability to store assets within Beanstalk in the internal balances, on your behalf. So whereas before we had wrapped beans in Beanstalk, which means Beanstalk holds a bean on your behalf and essentially is an IOU that's kind of targeted towards you. Basically, you send Beanstalk a bean. It's like, I hold the bean and I know you own this bean, so you can take it back at any time. And now, so because we have these in Beanstalk, these internal balances that support any kind of arbitrary ERC20 token, all of the independent function calls that we listed earlier, the wrapped ETH, the trade ETH to USDT, the add that as liquidity, can all use the internal balances to talk to each other. So when you call wrapped ETH, it takes that ETH, wraps it, leaves that wrapped ETH in your internal balance. And then when you swap that to USDT, it takes that ETH from your internal balance and converts it to USDT, which it then deposits your internal balance, and so on, which minimizes the amount of token transfers that we need to do overall, as the only interaction is to and from Beanstalk back and forth, and leads to kind of overall gas efficiency, which we're really excited about.
Okay, we have a few questions. Let's take them in the town hall chat. Kobe Bean asks, are there any marketing, Twitter Spaces, etc. planned for the next 10 days? from a PR perspective, we will be reaching out to our contacts in the media or to journalists and let them know about the unpause date. Then when it comes to appearances or interviews, the thinking or the strategy is to do them post-unpause. So let's say 2 days after we unpause Beanstalk. And that will give us the ability or the opportunity to talk about, the performance of Bean and Beanstalk on its unpause. Sync asks, we're going to need some tutorial videos for all of these new functionality. Agreed with that. We'll start with a demo in Thursday's DAO meeting, and definitely we can have some, tutorials or videos. Binology asks, he quotes a line from the blocks story or coverage about Root, asking or saying that the invested capital will be used as part of the barn raise. The idea of Root using that capital or the seed round in Beanstalk is because Root eventually plans on making markets on Beanstalk. So it makes sense for it to have those or that capital in Beanstalk in Beans in order for it to be able to facilitate or make or create those markets. The second question he asks from the Trail of Bit audit, where he says that the Trail of Bits didn't have enough time to look closely into the curve, convert, and silo facets. And Halborn seems to have looked into them to some degree. He asks, does this give you any concern, given that these are mission critical and they weren't covered? Publius, you can maybe comment on that.
It is unfortunate that Trail of Bits wasn't able to look too closely into some of the facets, and it's quite unfortunate given how much time the audit went for. There's not much else to say beyond kind of like we're doing everything we can to continuously test both through the UI, through command line, running large scale test simulations, unit tests, all different types of tests we can conceive. With those facets specifically, the silo facet has been a facet that's been around for a lot of time. It is quite complex, but there isn't too much changing there, based on what previously was there pre-exploit. The curve facet is fully new, and kind of, I guess the only concern you would have with it is that it could somehow, use more money that is directly allocated to it. It seems like Halborn did a good job looking at those specific pain points when tokens are being transferred, to and from the user to Beanstalk, and from Beanstalk to and from the curve pools themselves. Which definitely instills confidence, that they did a good job looking at that. But we've also done significant testing on our end to try to test every function with as many different types of inputs to try to break Beanstalk as much as possible. And from the testing perspective, of course, we take the mindset such that we're assuming that there's no one else looking at this, and we want to try to do the best to find all the bugs ourselves. And we're doing everything we can on that end. With the convert facet, there is a lot changing there with generalized convert and the implementation of the Bean3 curve convert. But that code has been in place for a long time, and we've been running it internally for since significantly before the exploit. And feel like we have pretty good coverage on that as well. Obviously it's something though, the fact that Trail of Bits did not look at these facets is something the community should consider and, kind of collectively come to a decision on whether it's anything of concern to them or not. But, personally, we're pretty pleased with the state of, testing Beanstalk, and, have been doing nothing but testing for, the past, pretty much since the audit started. So, we feel, that we're, in a pretty good place.
Sweet Red Beans asks, or I guess maybe this is more of a thinking question. If we could have a generalized transaction, builder. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sweet Red Beans. I think what he means there is just similar to what the farm is doing, but we would allow users to create their own transactions or build their own transaction on a UI builder. Let me know if that makes sense, and then what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Honestly, the farm is, a fantastic addition, but it's an absolute mess from a UI perspective. So, kudos to the UI team, Silo, Chad, Cool Beans, Sweet Red Beans for, doing their best to kind of work with the farm function and make it kind of legible from a user interaction perspective. Kind of one limitation, however, though, is, when we're grooming an experience for users, we obviously have to abstract away a lot of that complexity, kind of that, as a user, you don't really need to know what's happening under the hood. You just want to know where your assets are coming from, where they're going, be able to make sense of the inputs, the outputs, kind of know what's going on. And, although the farm is capable of everything, with the UI, we've only, kind of predefined paths for which, users can transact across, ones that we feel like are the most valuable and important. And over time, we can continue to add more cases and cases to the UI. But at some point, it kind of does warrant, a generalized transaction builder that is generalized, for the advanced user to be able to fully customize, their own farm function as they would want it. As, there will be a couple, paths that are, going to take a little bit longer to get off the ground. And, as we add more and more pipelines, we expect the number of possible farm functions to grow even further. And, it's kind of inevitable that there will be demand for some kind of generalized transaction builder.
Okay, I think we reached the end of the questions. If anyone else has other questions, feel free to drop them on the town hall chat. Okay, I'm tempted to start a separate discussion other than the unpose or the replant, and look a little bit ahead of the future of Beanstalk, or where we at, and build up on a question or an idea that we discussed briefly last week, which was a bank on top of Beanstalk to control the money supply of Beanstalk, and presented differently about having Beanstalk do it itself. Publius, are you up for discussing this now, or do you think we might want to have that some other time?
I'm up to discuss anything you want, Mod. I think it would be helpful, if you want to set the scene, you should probably explain the whole concept to everyone, and then we can take it from there. Great.
Okay. All right. So the idea, when we're on this current version, or what we're thinking of it right now, is what if the silo introduces a new kind of account? So right now, the way that we're interacting with the silo is, think of it as a current account where people can deposit and withdraw at any time. What if the silo has a new account that's a savings account, and people deposit just in beans? And then what Beanstalk does with that is that it uses those beans, and it allows anyone to come and borrow those beans against a collateral. When there is demand for beans, so the price of beans is above 1, and Beanstalk wants to increase the money supply, what it would do is it reduces the interest rate at which it offers those loans all the way down to 0, let's say, to encourage people to come in and borrow beans against collateral. And this way, Beanstalk is able to increase the supply without having to mint new beans. Then when the demand for beans drops and the price of beans is below 1, and Beanstalk wants to reduce its supply, what it would do is it would increase the interest rate on those loans to encourage people to close down their loans and reduce the supply of beans, or charge a high interest rate, and that would naturally also help bring back the price of bean back to 1, or reduce the supply of beans, because you're bringing it back by burning beans through that interest rate that you're taking. So to summarize it, what you're doing here is you're expanding and contracting the supply of beans through loans, and you're controlling it by either increasing the interest rate or reducing the interest rate to encourage loans, or encourage people to close back their loans. That allows you to expand and contract the supply of beans without having to mint new beans, nor nor issuing credit. So in effect, it becomes like an extra tool for peg maintenance for Beanstalk to use. Let me know if this makes sense, and what are your thoughts?
So to better understand what you're talking about, the question that I have is around the minting of new beans. And I see that Alex also asked it in the town hall chat, which is that, so instead of people that have deposited beans in the silo or deposited LP tokens in the silo, that people can deposit beans in the silo, or now you're suggesting that people can deposit other collateral and do what?
Yeah, so those who have beans can choose to either put them, in the normal accounts that we have, or into the savings account that people can then come and take loans against it. So now you have, you can either buy beans or borrow beans, and those will have two different, risk profiles, or two different people. So you wouldn't think of them as the same ones. Of course, some people who might have bought now will want to borrow, and the opposite. But in general, you'd expect them to be separate people. Those who want to buy are different from those who want to borrow. The way for you to borrow is that if you borrow beans, you're gonna have to put collateral, against it, and then Beanstalk holds that collateral until you close your loan.
And so the person that is putting beans in this savings account to lend out the beans, are they receiving the silo yield? Are they receiving the silo yield plus a premium, minus a premium? How does that work?
They just receive the silo yield, but they get 5 seeds instead of 4 seeds or 2 seeds. So they get more seeds, but they receive equal seigniorage just as everyone else.
And how does that work if the beans are being lent out?
If they're being lent out, you can't withdraw if there are outstanding loans. So because you're in the savings account, you can only withdraw if there are no outstanding loans. If there are outstanding loans, you'll have to wait.
But the beans are being lent to somebody. Someone's borrowing those beans.
Correct.
So how can they be receiving the silo yield if the beans are being lent out?
Great. Yes. Okay. So in effect, the way that it will happen is, let's say there are 1,000 beans deposited in the savings account. What Beanstalk would do is it would have those 1,000 beans. It will create 1,000 red beans. And those red beans are whitelisted in the silo. This will free up the other 1,000 beans for anyone to come and borrow them. So in effect, every red bean is backed by either an actual real bean that is not outside yet, or by collateral since someone borrowed it and put collateral against it.
And why would Beanstalk, or why would the DAO whitelist the red beans for deposit?
The same reason it whitelists any other asset, because it helps with peg maintenance.
And so now let's get into the idea of how that helps with peg maintenance. So just to restate the situation, somebody comes and deposits beans in this red bean account. This red bean account, and for some reason, why would Beanstalk offer more seeds than for a normal LP?
Yeah, because those beans now have a use or a utility. So those beans that are in the savings account, given that you are giving up it's how liquid they are, or your opportunity of being able to withdraw them at any time, since they're being given out on loans, stockholders profit from either the interest rate that's giving out, or from being able to contract and reduce the money supply of bean. So whenever you loan out beans, you're doing.
Why not 3 seeds? This is better than liquidity provided.
Sure, maybe 3 seeds. We can discuss.
But the concept is you get, instead of just straight depositing beans, there's some benefit to depositing these red beans that the protocol can lend out instead. And then the concept is that the protocol, assuming that it's done at the Beanstalk level, the beans stay deposited in the silo, but can also be borrowed. And they can be borrowed in the form of these red beans, which can be minted against this collateral. Is that correct?
To an extent, maybe I'll rephrase it again. Whenever anything gets into the savings account, say someone wants to deposit 1,000 beans into the saving account, Beanstalk would mint red beans, 1,000 red beans, and keep those 1,000 red beans in its ledger, so it has stock and seed, and then it has those other 1,000 beans free, outside of the silo for anyone to come and borrow them. So every red bean is backed by an actual bean, or if someone borrowed an actual bean and instead of it there's collateral, then this red bean is backed by a collateral instead of a bean. If you want to think of it in the way like traditional banks work, they just basically like issue credit, so it becomes like just like a ledger in a database. So we say that we have those beans, but there are actually no real beans.
Okay, so somebody deposits this bean into the red bean, let's call it the red bean silo, and then Beanstalk mints a red bean into the silo, which it then keeps as a bean, and then it also allows someone to borrow that bean, the actual bean, because someone else is putting collateral up against it. So someone now puts up ETH or LUSD or some other collateral, DAI, USDC, and then they borrow in a collateralized form. They borrow against their position.
Correct. For simplicity, let's say that the collateral will only be 3 curve. It will have to be a whitelisted asset, because this is how you charge interest, by swapping the collateral with whatever pool that you have and burn the beans. So let's say we only have bean 3 curve, and you can only take collateral in 3 curve.
So how would that work?
So let's say we have 1,000 loans outside at 10%. Whenever you charge interest, you would take 1 3 curve, swap it for beans, and then take that beans and burn it. That way you reduce the supply of beans, or you accrued interest for all stockholders.
Got it. So there's some extra rake on top for having this outstanding position.
Yeah, it's the interest rate at which you took the loan. It could be 0.
But if the beans are burned, then how is the red beans backed by the beans? Oh, you're saying because it comes from the 3 curve, it comes from the other asset.
Yeah.
So the collateral is occasionally burned.
Yes. All the way up to 0, unless someone closes their loan. But if no one closes their loan, then at the end of the day, we burn, because we give someone a bean. We eventually burnt it because we used all their collateral to burn it.
Is the collateral type only bean related assets like bean 3 curve, or could it be USDC?
In theory, it can be anything, but for simplicity, we might want to think or keep it as only a whitelisted asset.
And the purpose of this is so that we can have increased sell pressure when the price is above 1, or how it helps with peg maintenance. And so it essentially front runs the protocol and kind of pushing down the price faster, given that there's, demand to make the spread at the current interest rate.
So it can be in 2 ways, because you can expand and contract supply. So let's say it's time where you want to expand supply, then you would offer 0 interest rates or low interest rates. It depends on how fast people are interested in it. But the interest rate would keep decreasing to encourage more and more people to take loans. And as they take loans, the supply of beans increases. So you'd expect the price of bean to drop. And then when the opposite happens, you start increasing the interest rate, keep increasing it, so that people who already have outstanding loans are encouraged to return their loans and close it down, and that would reduce the supply of bean. If they don't close their loans, then you keep burning their collateral, and that will naturally, it's like you're closing their loans for them.
Totally makes sense. I mean, it seems a little bit like kind of like DAI's CDP model, where they have their fluctuating interest rate, as the price of DAI moves above and below 1. But instead of kind of liquidating against DAI, the asset that's liquidated immediately gets either buys back beans or gets converted into strictly beans and then just burns them. Makes sense.
Yeah, Alex asks, I think there are a few questions, maybe I've missed them, but one of the questions is like, how would that have an effect on liquidity providers or LPs? In general, there will be two, you'll think of them as two different like risk profile people, because those who borrow beans are restrained by the interest rate of whatever the interest rate is that changes. So they'll be different versus those who buy beans and can hold it. So if you wanted to long beans and you borrowed a lot of beans and then the price of bean is down, the interest rate keeps going up, you don't have the option to hold your beans or keep them. You're going to be forced to return it or pay a very high interest rate. So they're different. They're different people or different profiles from it. The one thing that would happen is, yes, you're not going to issue as much credit, and you're not going to also mint as much, depending on how many people borrow. And close their loans, but that will also depend on maybe there is no one at all interested in borrowing beans, or maybe there are a lot who are interested in borrowing beans, but the market will decide that.
So I think what's even more interesting is implementing this on top of both beans and LP tokens, where you still have the base assets getting converted such that the peg is maintained maximally at the protocol level, at the macro level. But then it is really interesting, Mod, to have some sort of layer of people can borrow beans and put up collateral to sell them at an interest rate where the trade is profitable if the rate of interest that they're paying over the time of the short, where they're borrowing the beans, selling the beans, and waiting to buy them back at peg. It's just that the interest rate over that period of time has to be less than the spread that they're collecting. So it's a really interesting concept where it allows tighter peg maintenance and less growth from inorganic demand for beans. It's pretty unique. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, agreed. I think whatever mints that are taken away is going to be inorganic demand in effect, and then Beanstalk will have the ability to remove all of that inorganic demand without having to impact its sell pressure, basically. Let's think it over and see where does this take us, or how does it develop.
Yeah, it's a super neat idea, Mod. It's like really cool.
Okay, I have no more questions or ideas.
Come on, you have plenty more ideas, Mod. Don't undersell us.
No, I think this is where we, or at least for today.
Awesome. What a fun class.
Yeah, I have to say, class is my favorite day of the week.
Lots of fun.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us. Publius, as always, thank you for making the time and chatting with us, and see you all next. Once, maybe a reminder, on this Thursday DAO meeting, we're gonna have a live demo for the new user interface. Otherwise, see you all in the next class.